In this lecture, you'll see how to configure multi-protocol with a lab demo. It's going to be a long lecture because I want to show you the complete configuration end to end, all the way from creating an SVM that can support all the NAS protocols to doing the final configuration to support multi-protocol from your different clients. I'll show you that complete end-to-end config using the System Manager GUI first, and then at the end of the video, I'll show you how to use the command line to do just the multi-protocol commands. Okay, let's do it. The scenario here is that we've got some users in Department A, and sometimes they use a Windows client and sometimes they use a Linux client to access the same files and folders. So we need to give access to those files and folders from both Windows using sifs and also from Linux using NFS. So on our cluster one here, I'm going to create an SVM. I'll call the SVM multi, and the volumes in there are going to have the mixed security style because I want clients to be able to set the permissions both from Windows and from Linux clients as well. And on that SVM, obviously, I'm going to enable both sifs and NFS. For the incoming client connections over the network, those connections are going to terminate on ports E0D and E0E on node 1, and also ports E0D and E0E on node 2. So I'm going to have a logical interface on each of those underlying physical ports. I'm going to use the same logical interface with the same IP address for both the sifs and the NFS incoming connections. Okay, so that's everything that's going to be configured. The users have already been set up on both Linux and in Windows as well. So let's have a look at those users. So I will go to my Linux machine first. So let me just open up a command line on there. I'm going to log in as my FLACKBOX user and put the password in. And to see the users, I'll do a cat. And that is in /etc/ the password file. So I've just created two users in there for this lab demo. That is D Jones and J Smith. D Jones has got the UID of 1003 and J Smith has got the UID of 1004. They're both in the sales group, which has got the GID of 1001. I'm going to need to create matching users on the SVM as well, but I haven't created the SVM yet. So once the SVM is created, I'm going to create matching users in there. So notice that the usernames were D Jones and J Smith. Now let's have a look at the Windows users. So I'm going to go on to my Windows domain controller here, and I'll open up Active Directory users and computers, and then look in my users OU, and you see that I've got the same users configured in Windows as well. We have got David Jones, that is the username, D Jones, so that matches what we had on the Linux machine. But if we have a look at John Smith, that is the J Smith user, but if you can see it here, his username is not J Smith, it's J.Smith. So the J Smith, John Smith, that has got a different username in Windows than it has in Linux. So obviously, real world, you would probably stick to a naming convention for your users. The reason I've got the two usernames in here is so that I can show you what happens when the usernames are the same on both sides. And I'll also show you what happens when we've got different usernames that we need to map between. So D Jones is the same, J Smith is different. Okay, let me see what we're going to do next. Okay. Another thing I'll show you on here, because it's really important whenever you're doing the labs, is make sure that the date and time is the same on your domain controller as it is on your Ontap system whenever you're doing anything with CIFS. So looking at the domain controller here, I can see that it is the 29th of March, 2019, and the time is 2:33 p.m. Let's just check that I've got a matching time on Ontap. So I've already opened up an SSH session here. So I'll say cluster date show, and it's the same time zone, US Pacific, on both my Ontap system and the domain controller. And I can see that the date is the same and the time is the same as well. When you're doing the lab yourself, again, remember you have to make sure they're on the same time or your users are not going to be able to authenticate. The way that you change the time is with a cluster date modify, and then you want to modify the date and time. And then the format of this is the year, like 2019, and then the month, like 03, and then the date, like the 29th, and then the time in 24-hour format, like 14:33. So that's how you would modify it if you need to set the same time here as on your domain controller. Okay, I've already got the same time there, so I am all good. Okay, so we've got our users configured in Linux and in Windows. We've done the time synchronization as well. So now I can go ahead and create my SVM in Ontap. So I'm going to go into System Manager, and before I create the SVM, let me show you that I've also set up the network settings already too. So I go to Network and Subnets. I've created a subnet called Multi, and in there it's got IP addresses for my 4 lifts. I'm going to use 172.23.2.41 to 172.23.2.44. So I'm going to use that subnet to put the IP addresses on my lifts. I've already configured my DNS load balancing as well. If I quickly go back to my Windows server, and then I'll go to Server Manager and Tools and DNS, and just expand this out, and then go to my forward lookup zone for FLACKBOX'S.lab, and you can see I've got my 4 entries there, which I've called Multi, which is the same name that I'm going to name the SVM, and that's got the 4 IP addresses, 172.23.2.41 to 42. Okay, so let's create the SVM. So I'll minimize this and go back into System Manager for my Ontap system. I'll go to Storage and then SVMs. And I've got a couple here I created in earlier labs. I'm going to create a new SVM to support both NFS and CIFS. I'm going to call this SVM Multi, and I'm going to enable both CIFS and NFS on the SVM. Because CIFS is enabled on the SVM when I'm creating it, the security style defaults to NTFS. I'm happy with the root aggregate. I need to check the DNS configuration. Yes, my domain name is FLACKBOX'S.lab. That's the Active Directory domain I'm going to be joining for CIFS. And the DNS server is my WinA client at 172.23.4.1. So that's all good. I can submit and continue. Then it's going to take me to the protocol configuration page. And for the data lifts, yes, I do want to use the same lifts for both CIFS and NFS. You can split it out into separate lifts for CIFS and NFS if you want to. This makes things more logical and easier to have them both running on the same lifts here. For assigning the IP address, I'm going to use my subnet of Multi and click on OK. And the port that this first lift is going to be on is on node 1 port E0D. Click on OK to that. Then I need to add my CIFS information to join this SVM to the Active Directory domain. I'm going to also call it Multi here as well. I want it to be known as Multi, both as the SVM and also in Active Directory. Again, to keep things logical. My Active Directory domain is FLACKBOX'S.lab. I'll put it in the computers OU. My Windows administrator is administrator. And I'll also enter the password here as well. I'm not going to create a volume in the wizard. I'm going to create the volume later. And I'm not using an NIS server. And I'm also going to create my volume for NFS later as well. So I click on Submit and Continue here. Then the next page is going to ask me if I want to configure an SVM level administrator. Don't need to do that here, so I'm going to skip that. And then see the summary page, and I can click on OK. And that is my SVM created, and I can see it's running both NFS and CIFS on here. Now, when I created the SVM in the wizard, it only allows me to create my first lift there. I want to have 3 other lifts spread across the other underlying physical interfaces. So to do that, I'm going to go to the network section and go to network interfaces. Let's check what the name of my first lift is. multi_cifs_nfs_lift1. And that got the first IP address, 172.23.2.41. So I'm going to create my next logical interface. I'll use the same naming convention. So that is going to be multi_cifs_nfs. And this is going to be lift2. Let me just copy this and I make that lift2. The SVM is multi. I want this lift to support both CIFS and NFS. For the IP address, I'm going to use my multi subnet. And this is going to go on E0E on node 1. Click on create. Next up, I can create my first lift on node 2. So that's going to be lift 3. Again, in the multi SVM, I'm going to use my multi subnet. And this is going to be on node 2, port E0D. And I forgot to select the protocols there. So let me just click CIFS and NFS, and I should now be able to create it. And then the last one, I'll paste in the name again, and this is lift 4. The SVM is multi, supporting both CIFS and NFS. I'm using my multi-subnet, and this is on node 2 port E0D, and create that. So that is my 4 lifts created now. I'll just refresh the page to put them in the correct order. And I can see I've got my multi-lift 1, 2, 3, and 4, using IP addresses 172.23.2.41 through to 44. Okay, so my networking is now all configured. That is all good. Let's go back to the SVMs page, and I'll select multi and click on the SVM settings. And I can see here that CIFS is enabled and running, and so is NFS. NFS has got the default of version 3 supported right now. Okay, so I had my users configured on the Linux system. Because I'm using the local database for authentication in this example, I need to create my Unix users and groups in the SVM as well. First off, I will create the group. We said that they were in the sales group, and that was GID 1001. I'll add that, and then click on the users tab and add the users. The first user was D Jones. His user ID on the Linux system was 1003. I need to use matching settings here. The group is sales, and I'll give him a full name of David Jones. Add David, and then my other user was J Smith with no dot on the Linux side. The user ID 1004. The group name is sales, and I'll give him the full name of John Smith and add him. And let's just double check that. So I'll go back to my Linux command line, and there we go. We see D Jones was a UID 1003, J Smith was UID 1004, and they're both in the sales group, which has got GID 1001. So I've got matching settings on my Linux system and also in my Ontap system. Okay, so that is good. Next thing that I'm going to do is, by default, the Ontap system will map Windows domain administrators to the Unix root account. And if I go and have a look on my Windows system, and then go to Active Directory Users and Computers and look in the Domain Admins group, you'll see that I've added David Jones and John Smith there. The reason I did that is because I need them to be able to log on to my server here to be able to test things. Because it's a domain controller, they need to be members of the domain admin groups to do that. So normally you would not add a normal user to the domain admin group. I'm just doing it here for the lab. But because they are members of domain admins, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to disable that default rule, which will map domain admin users to the Unix root account. We're not actually going to be using it here anyway, but I just want to ensure that that is not confusing matters. So to ensure that it doesn't, I'm going to turn it off. So I'm going to go to my Ontap command line to do that, because I can't do that in the GUI. And I need to also go to the advanced privilege level. So I will say advanced privilege, set privilege advanced. And yes, I do want to do that. And then the command that I need to enter, it's at the SVM level. So I say vserver, and it's a CIFS option. So I say CIFS options, and I'm going to modify. And the vserver I'm doing this for is multi, the one that I just created. And the option that I want to change is admin users mapped to root enabled? By default, it's true. I'm going to change it here to false. So I've just disabled that mapping. And then I can go back to my normal admin level in here. Okay, next thing that I'm going to do is back in Ontap, I am going to create my volumes. So I'll go back into System Manager, and under Storage, I will go to Volumes. And what I'm going to do here is I will create a volume called Windvall, which is usually used by Windows users. So I'm going to set that as NTFS security style. And I'm also going to create a volume called Unix Vol, which is usually used by Linux users. And I'm going to set that with Unix permissions. So let's go ahead and do that. So in volumes, I'm going to create a flex vol. I will do my win_vol first. Let's choose a random aggregate here. It doesn't really matter for this lab demo. And again, because it's a lab demo, I'm going to make it a really small size of only 50 megabytes. And then click on Create. And because my SVM was created with CIFS enabled, that means that the default security style is NTFS. So my root volume has got security style of NTFS, and also my WinVol will as well. So if I select that volume I just created and edit, I can see that the security style is NTFS. So that's what I want for my Windows volume. That's good. I'll cancel out of here. And then I'm going to create my Unix volume as well. So I will call that Unix_vol and choose an aggregate to put this one in. And I'm also going to make this the small size of 50 megabytes. Click Create for that. And again, because it's in the same SVM, if I select it and go to Edit, I'll see that that's defaulted to the NTFS security style as well. Well, you can change the security style of your volumes and of your queue trees, and I want to do that here. This is normally going to be accessed by Linux clients, so I want it to have Unix style permissions. So for the security style, I'm going to click the drop down and change this to Unix. Also, I'm going to just give everybody full permissions here. Now, in a real world environment, you're probably going to want to lock this down. But for the lab here, just again, so that it doesn't complicate things or cause us to do any extra troubleshooting, I'm just going to give everyone full access. And I'm going to save that. And come out of there. Okay, so that is my volumes done. Let's check that both of those volumes are mounted in the namespace. So I'll go to junction paths. They should be, because I created them in System Manager, which is going to mount them in the namespace directly under the root volume by default. And I can see that, yes, that has happened. There is my WinVol and Unix Vol as well, already in the namespace. Next thing that I am going to do is configure an export policy for my NFS clients. So back under storage again, I'll go back onto the SVMs page, click on my multi-SVM and go to the SVM settings again. And then in here, I'm going to look at my export policies. And because this is a new SVM, it's only got one export policy, which is default. And by default, it does not have any rules. So by default, my NFS clients are not going to have any access to this SVM. So I need to grant them access. So again, real world, you would probably want to create a new export policy in here and specify exactly the access that you want to allow. You've already seen how to configure export policies earlier in this section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just edit the default policy and I'm going to grant everybody access there. So I'm adding a rule to the default policy and I'm going to just allow everybody. So that is 0.0.0.0/0, and I'm going to allow read-only and read-write and super user access here. Again, real-world environment, you're probably going to want to lock that down more. Okay, so we've got the SVM created. We have got the volumes created. We've configured the export policy. Next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to share those volumes. So I go to the shares page, and I'm going to click on create share and browse. And first off, I will share my Unix volume and click on OK and create. And then I need to create another share for my Win volume, browse for that. And I'm sharing my Windows volume as well. If I select one of these and go to edit under permissions, you see that the default permission is everyone full control. And again, real world environment, maybe you want to lock that down a bit more. Okay, so I've got my SVM done. I've enabled both CIFS and NFS on the SVM. I've configured my export policy to allow access for my NFS clients, and I've shared both my Win and my Unix volumes. Okay, so that is everything that I needed to do for the setup. Let's now see how multi-protocol is going to work. So first off, I'm going to log in to my Linux box as one of my Linux users. So I'm going to use putty for that. I've already got a shortcut entered here to get onto that Linux A box. And first off, I will log in as D Jones. Actually, no, I won't log in as D Jones first because I need to mount both of those exports first, both of my volumes. So I'm going to log in here as my FLACKBOX user and put in the password. And then I am going to make my directories first. So I'll say sudo to run this as root and make directory, and it's going to be mount and Unix _vol, and then enter the password and hit the up arrow, and I'm going to do that for my WinVol as well. So I've created the directories. Now I need to actually mount the volumes into there. So that's going to be sudo and it's mount, and the hostname, which is in DNS, is multi, and then it was Unix Vol is the first one, and I'm going to mount that into mount/Unix _vol, and then I'm also going to mount my Windows volume here as well. So that is multi win _vol into mount win _vol. Okay, so I've got both of my volumes mounted. Now I'm going to log in as D Jones. So I'll right click up in the top left corner here in putty. I'll make a duplicate session and I'm going to log in as D Jones and enter their password. Okay, so let's change directory to the Unix Vol. And then I'm going to make a file in here. So what I'm doing is I'm making a file in my Unix volume, which has got the Unix permissions set on it. It's a Unix security style. So to do that, I'm going to open up my Vi editor and let's call this file 1.txt. Then when I'm in here, I hit the I key to insert, and I'll say this is file 1, and then to quit and save that, I'll hit escape, and then a colon, and then W for write, and Q for quit, and hit enter. I can now say cat file 1.txt, and I can see there is the contents of the file. This is file 1. Okay, next thing that I'm going to do is to set the Unix style permissions on there. So to do that, I use the change mode command, and I'm going to just allow the owner access to this file. So that is a 7 for the owner to give them read, write, execute. And then for the group, I'm going to give that 0, no access, and everyone else is also no access as well. And that is on file 1.txt. To verify that, I can do an ls-l, and I can see there that for my file 1.txt, the owner is D Jones, and the permissions are the owner, D Jones, his read, write, execute. Nobody else has any other access. Okay, so that's the file done. Now let's see if my Windows user of D Jones is able to access the file or not. So I'm going to go back onto my Windows machine here, click on VM, Control-Alt-Delete, and I need to switch the user here and send a Control-Alt-Delete again, click Other User, and the other user is D Jones, and enter the password. Okay, so I'm logging in as my D Jones user in Windows, and this user has got the same username as the user in Unix. So what should happen is that this user should be able to access that file. With the default mapping, where if the Windows username is the same as the Unix username, it will use that username. It should attempt to access the file as the Unix user of D Jones, which does have read, write, execute access. So this should work without needing to configure any name mappings. So let's verify that. So I will open up File Explorer, and I will map my network drives first. So I right click on network, map network drive, and I'll map both of them while I'm here. So that is multi /win, in fact, let's do Unix first, /Unix _ vol, and finish. And I'm not testing this yet, but I will do in a minute. So let's also map the drive to WinVol as well. So I'll map the network drive again, // multi is the name of the SVM, and this is now going to be win _ vol. So I can see that I've got both of my volumes mapped there. If I look in Unix Vol, I should see file 1. There it is. And if I double click on it, yes, I'm able to access it. So I've at least got read permissions. And let's say that this is edit by Windows user D Jones, and see if I can save it. And yes, I can. So I've got my write access as well. And if I do a right click on the file and go to properties and look at the security, you can see when it updates that this has got Unix style permissions on there. So you can see that the user is D Jones. You can see that it's Unix permissions on there. Okay. So I can see that in the direction of a Windows user trying to access a file with Unix permissions set on there, when the username is the same on both sides, I don't need to configure anything. That is going to be allowed by default. Let's see what happens now when the username is different. So I'll go back on to my Linux system again, and I'm going to log in as JSmith now. So I'll create another duplicate session. Here, I'm logging in as JSmith. So remember, on the Linux side, it was JSmith with no dot in it. And put my password in there and try to do it without a typo this time. Okay, I'm in. So as JSmith, I'm also going to change directory into Unix Vol, and I'll try to do that without a typo again. So it's MNT, not MTN. And let's try one more time. There we go. All right. So I'm in the volume now. Let's create another file in there now. So I'll use the vi editor again, and I'll make this one file2.txt. And hit I to insert text. And I'll say this is file 2. And then hit escape. And then colon. And then write and quit. And I also need to set the permissions here as well. So I'll say change mode again. And again, I am going to set the permissions as 700. This is for file2.txt now. And if I do an ls-l, I can see that for file 2, the owner is JSmith. The owner of JSmith has got read, write, execute permissions. Nobody else has got any permission. So let's go and look and see if when JSmith is working on the Windows machine, if we're going to have access to this file or not. So let's go back into Windows. And then in here, I'm going to sign out because I'm in as D Jones right now. And send a Control-Alt-Delete. And I'm going to log in as the other user. And on Windows, it's not JSmith, it's j.smith. That's a different username. And I'll enter the password. And then when it finishes loading up the user profile, I'll open up File Explorer, and I'm going to map the network drives for JSmith as well. So there's the icon for File Explorer. Go in there, and I'm going to right-click on Network, map a network drive, and let me try that again, map a network drive, and say //, the name in DNS is multi, and /, the share name was Unix Vol, is the first one. And then while I'm here, I'll also map WinVol as well. So it's // multi /win_vol. Okay. Now, if I go into Unix Vol, I should see both files. File 1 is owned by D Jones. So, of course, if I double click on that, I'm going to get access is denied. File 2 is owned by JSmith, but it's JSmith in Unix, it's j.smith in Windows. So when I double click on this, I'm going to get access is denied. That default mapping of the same usernames doesn't help me here because the usernames are different. So I want JSmith to be able to access his files whether he's working in Linux or in Windows. So I need to configure a name mapping for this. So to do that, I'm going to go back into Ontap System Manager, and then I'll go to the SVMs page, select the multi SVM, go to the SVM settings, and name mappings are down here at the bottom. And I'm going to add a new mapping. So I want to allow my Windows user to access the files which are set with the Unix permissions. So that direction is Windows to Unix. Position 1 is fine. And then the pattern that I'm going to be matching on here. Well, when the Windows username is sent to the Ontap system, it includes the domain name at the start. And our domain name here is FLACKBOX'S. So that's going to be the start of the username that is sent in. After that, we have a /, because / is a regular expression wildcard. I need to say literally a /. So for that, it is //. // means literally one /. Then what we had after that was the user's first initial. And I'm going to need to copy that down to the replacement. So I'm going to put it in brackets. So I say open brackets, and then that first initial could be any character. So the regular expression to match any character is a dot. and then I'm going to close brackets. So that is me matching the first initial now. Then what we have after that is a dot. Like the username was j.smith. So we've got the first initial is the J, then after that we've got the dot. The dot is also a wildcard, it's a regular expression. So to say that I mean literally a dot, I need to say \dot. And then after that, we have got the user's surname. So that can be any length of characters. And I'm going to want to carry it down into the replacement again. So I'm going to put this in brackets as well. So I say open brackets, and then it needs to have at least one character there. So I'm going to say a dot, meaning match any character. And then it can be any length of characters. So for that, I'm going to put in a plus. So dot plus means a variable length string of any characters. There has to be at least one character there. And then close the brackets. So this is going to match FLACKBOX'S. So for our example, the user was j.smith. And it's going to send their Windows domain name at the start of the username. So we've got the domain name, FLACKBOX'S. Then there is a backslash. So that was my backslash. And then we have got their first initial. And then we've got a dot. And then we have got their surname. We've put their first initial and their surname inside brackets. And we need to copy those down. So to copy the first set of brackets down, that is \1, which is their first initial. And then to copy the surname down, that's in the second set of brackets. So that is \2. So now when the username of FLACKBOX'S \j.smith gets sent into Ontap, and they're trying to access a file or folder which has got Unix style permissions on there, it's going to look in the name mappings from Windows to Unix. It's going to find this one here, and it's going to convert that FLACKBOX'S j.smith to just plain j.smith, the initial and the surname. And j.smith is the username in Unix, which does have permission to access that file. So when I add this, j.smith on the Windows system should be able to access that file that was created in Unix. So let's go back to Windows again, and I need to re-authenticate my user in Windows for this to work because we're still using the current credentials right now. So I'm going to sign out as jsmith, and then I'm going to sign back in as jsmith again. So I've signed out, and then I'll go to the VM menu here, send a Control-Alt-Delete in VMware, and log back in as John Smith again. Okay, and now if I open up File Explorer, I've already mapped the drives there so I can see them. I'll go to Unix Vol, and now, fingers crossed, when I double click on File 2, I'm able to access the file now. So I've got at least read permission. Let's try making an edit to check the right permission. I'll say edit by j.smith, Windows user, and check if I can save that. And yes, I can. Okay, all good. So that's how to do mappings from Windows to Unix users. You've seen how it works when the username is the same, and you've also seen how to explicitly configure a name mapping when the usernames are not the same. So that was for Windows to Unix. Let's also do the other direction, which is from Unix to Windows. So for that, I need to create my files in Windows first. Let's check it for where the username is the same first. So I'm going to log out here as my j.smith user and log back in as d.jones again. So send a Control-Alt-Delete, log in as another user, and this is going to be djones now, and enter their password. Okay, so I'm logged in as djones on my Windows system. So I'm going to go to my WinVol, and I'll create a new text file in here. So I'll just right click in the free space and say new text document. I'm going to name this file 3, and then I'm going to open it, and I'll say this is file 3, and I will save that file. Now it's got the default permissions right now, which is going to be everyone full control. So I'm going to lock this down to djones. So I right click on the file and go to properties, and then go to security, and click on Advanced, and I'm going to disable the inheritance here and remove all the current permissions from the object. Okay, so now nobody's got any access, so I need to add that. I click on the Add button, I select the principal, which is my user or group, and I'm going to add D. Jones here, check the name, and it's good. Click on OK, and I'm going to give D. Jones full control of the file. Click OK, OK again, and OK again. All right, so I've got my file 3 on my Windows volume with the NTFS permissions on there. Let's see if my matching username of D. Jones in Unix is able to access and edit this file. So for that, let's see all of my sessions here. I can see there's my D. Jones user is logged in, and as D. Jones, I'm going to change directory to mount/win_vol now. And let's do an ls-l to see the file there, and there it is, file 3, the one I just created in Windows. Let's now see if I can edit it as D. Jones. I should be able to, because the default Unix to Windows mapping should take care of this for me. Let's test it. So I'll say vi, and it's file3.txt. And I'm just getting a warning here because the file was just opened in Windows about the swap file. I can ignore this by pressing enter, and I see there is file 3. I'll hit I to insert some text, and I guess I messed that up. Okay, let's try going down here. You know what? Let's just say this is an edit by D. Jones Unix user. So it's not the tidiest file now. That's okay. It's not important for this lab demo. So I'll hit escape now, and then a colon, and then write and quit, and hit enter. And if I now cat file3.txt, I can see, yes, I was able to read and edit that file as my Unix user. So that's now verified that that default user mapping, when the users are the same, is working in both directions, Windows to Unix and Unix to Windows as well. How about when the usernames are different? Let's check that. So I will go and open up my session here where I'm logged in as J. Smith. And as J. Smith, I'm going to change directory to Windvall. And you can see that I'm getting permission denied. So when there's not a matching mapping there, I can't even mount the Windows volume. So I want J. Smith to be able to access that file when he's working either on a Linux or on a Windows system. So to allow that, I need to configure a mapping. So let's go back into Ontap again, and I'm already on the name mapping page. And I already configured a mapping for J.Smith, the Windows user, to J. Smith, the Unix user. But these mappings are unidirectional. So even though J.Smith can access those Unix files and folders from the Windows machine, that doesn't mean that this rule is going to work in the other direction as well. I need to explicitly add an additional rule for that. So I'm going to click on Add here, and I'm going to you see that it puts in position 2 by default. The direction is the opposite direction now, so I'm going to select Unix to Windows, and my Windows to Unix rules and my Unix to Windows rules are separate, so I can make this also position number 1 because it's going in the other direction. And the pattern that I'm going to be looking for here is my Unix username of J. Smith. But I'm going to need to copy down his first initial and his surname. So to do that, I need to specify the first initial, and I'm going to be copying it down, so I need to put it in brackets. So for that, it's open brackets, and then a dot to match any character of the first initial, because I want this to work for all my different users, and then close brackets, and then the surname, I'm going to be copying that again, so open brackets, and that can be any length of characters, so that is dot plus, and then close brackets. And then what I'm going to replace that with, well, I need to prepend the Windows domain name, so that is FLACKBOX'S, and then I need a backslash, and that's a regular expression, so to say literally a backslash, I say backslash, backslash. Then I'm going to be copying down their first initial, which is in the first set of brackets. So for that, I say \1. Next, I have a dot because the Windows username is j.smith. To put a dot in, again, that's a regular expression. So I need to say literally a dot. So I say \dot. And then I need to put in the surname, which is in the second set of brackets from the pattern. So for that, I say \2. So now for the username jsmith, that is going to be changed to FLACKBOX'S \j.smith. And this won't just work for that jsmith user. If I was in an environment where all my Unix users, the format of their username was first initial and then surname, and then all of my Windows users were first initial, then dot, then surname, this will work for all of the different users. So you don't have to do it like this. If it was just for the one user, I could have just said in here that the pattern is jsmith and the replacement is FLACKBOX'S \j.smith. But because I want this to work for all of my different users, that's why I'm using my regular expressions here. And you saw that if you look at the pattern and replacement, this looks crazy complicated if you didn't know what it was, right? But when you see me breaking it down into piece by piece, it's actually quite simple. So regular expressions, they look difficult if you haven't seen them before, but once you understand how they work, they're actually pretty simple. So I can click on Add here now. And now I should be able to access that file as the Unix user. So I'm going to open up a new session. So I'll open up PuTTY and go to Linux A. And I'm going to log in as jsmith and enter jsmith's password. And let's see if I can enter the Windows volume now. So I'll change directory to My Svm. This was not working before. Now it is, and let's see if I can access that file. So I will it was file 4.txt. Yeah, I've got at least read access to it, and I will hit insert, and I will say this is an edit by Unix user jsmith, and escape, and colon, and write, and quit, and done. Okay, so that was it. So you saw there how to configure multi-protocol so that both CIFS and NFS users can access the same files and folders, and how to configure the name mappings that allow that to happen. I wanted to show you the complete end-to-end solution here, all the way from configuring the SVM to support both CIFS and NFS, and how to create multi-protocol on there. So I've done that here using the System Manager GUI. I also want to show you how to do the configuration using the command line as well. Now, for the command line, you've already seen earlier in the course how to use the command line to create an SVM, to create volumes in the SVM, to configure export policies, to configure your CIF shares, etc. That's all done already. So what I'm going to show you here is just how to configure those name mappings, because everything else that was showing you here, you already know how to do that. So let's go and go back to my command line in Ontap, which I don't think I've still got open. So let's open up a new session. So I'll go to PuTTY and open up a session onto cluster 1. I'll log in as admin and then enter my password in here. And I'm going to enter those same name mappings. So instead of getting an error message, I'd better delete them in the GUI. So I will select the first one here and delete it. And then the second one and delete that as well. And then let's recreate those same name mappings in the command line. So in the command line, the command to do this, it's a vserver level command. So I say vserver and then name mapping and create. Let's check the syntax. I need to specify the vserver that this is going to be for first. The vserver is multi. Then specify the direction. the first thing that we did was from Windows to Unix. So I'll say Win-Unix, then specify the position, and I'll put this in position 1, and then specify the pattern that I'm going to be matching on. So that is -pattern, and the first one, this is where we were translating our Windows username to the Unix username. And when you put in the pattern and the replacement, if it includes regular expressions, you have to put these in quotes. Even if there's not any spaces there, which there probably won't be, you have to put it in quotes or this command is not going to work. So I'm going to open up the quotes with the double quotes symbol, and then we had the domain name first. So that was FLACKBOX'S, and then there's a backslash. So to say literally a backslash, I have to say backslash, and then we had the user's first initial, which we're going to carry into the replacement. So I need to put that in brackets. So it's open brackets and then a dot to say any character to match their first initial, and then close brackets. And then after that, there was literally a dot. It was the domain name and then j.smith. So I need to match on the dot. It's literally a dot. So I say \dot. And then I need to match on the surname, which can be variable length characters. And I want to carry it into the replacement. So I put it in brackets. So that's open brackets and then dot plus to match variable length of characters, and close the brackets and then close the quotes. So that is my pattern done, and then a space, and then the replacement that I'm going to change this to. Again, I need to include it in the quotes, and it was the first initial, which I'm carrying over from the pattern. So that was \1, and then the surname was \2. So FLACKBOX'S \j.smith is going to be converted to j.smith. And all of my other usernames, which are using that same format for the username of first initial dot surname, it'll work for them as well. Hit enter. And then it's going to just tell me about how I say a literal backslash. I have to say 2 backslashes. We knew that already, so I can say yes. So that's my mapping for my Windows to Unix users. I also need to do a mapping for the same users coming back in the other direction. So that is also going to be vserver name mapping create. And again, it is vserver multi. The direction now is going to be Unix to Windows. I'll put this in position 1 again because it's in a different direction, so I can start numbering at 1 again. And the pattern is going to be their first initial and then their surname. I put this in quotes, and then I need to match on the initial, and I'm going to carry it into the replacement, so I put it in brackets. So that is a dot in brackets to match any character. And then the surname is going to be variable length characters, and I'm going to carry that into the replacement as well. So that goes in brackets too, and it is dot plus. Then close the brackets and then close the quotes. Okay, so that is the pattern done. And then I need to specify the replacement in quotes again. I need to prepend the Windows domain name. That was FLACKBOX'S. And then I need a backslash, so that is \backslash to say literally a backslash. And then I'm going to copy the first initial from the pattern, so that is \1. And then I need to put in a dot between the initial and the surname. So I say \dot to say literally a dot. And then the surname is \2 to copy it over from the pattern and close the quotes. And say yes. And if I go back into System Manager again and refresh the page here, you can see that those patterns are exactly the same as when I configured them in the GUI. Thanks for watching. If you want to get hands-on practice with NetApp storage for free on your laptop, then you can download my free ebook, which you can see above my head right now. Also, check out my NetApp Storage Complete course, which will teach you everything you could possibly want to know about Ontap. Thanks.